Ali Safavi is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of NCRI. He's going to talk about the foreign policy of the NCRI and international relations and how foreign countries can best support what they're doing. Let me just give you ask you a question to sort of focus the attention a little bit, Ali. You know, there are those who say that by getting tough on the Iranian regime, criticizing Trump, saying getting tough on the Iranian regime just strengthens it because it causes Iranians to rally around their flag and be more patriotic than they would otherwise be. In talking about how foreign nations can best support the people of Iran, could you just bear that question in mind and maybe answer it a little bit?
Definitely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Early, and thank you, Ms. Samsami, for your presentation. I guess let me start off by answering your question. The fact is that this whole narrative that if the Western countries, and in particular the United States, pursue a tough policy on Iran, that the Iranian people will support the regime and rally around the leadership, I think is a false narrative. And I think the video that you saw, and of course hundreds of others that we have, clearly demonstrate that that has not happened. Indeed, the most prevalent, or one of the most prevalent slogans in Iran over the past year, even after the United States pulled out of the JCPOA, was the enemy is right here. They lie when they say to America. And so Iranian people blame the mullahs regime for the current misery, for the current destitution, for the current problems. A corrupt gang that has ruled this nation basically stolen their wealth, used it on foreign wars, and of course it's a corrupt regime. So in this sense, if anything, the Iranian people would welcome a tough policy on Iran, not vice versa. And with that, let me segue into what I was going to speak about was when we talk about Western countries, four decades of policy in dealing with Iran, we can find a common thread throughout. An attempt to work with the ruling regime, whether through carrot or sticks, in the hopes of moderating its behavior. And I think lost in this whole approach is where do the people of Iran stand and what do they want? The track record of this policy speaks for itself. Over the past 40 years, this course of action has not produced meaningful results. The Iranian regime has not moderated for the simple reason that, as the Persian saying goes, no snake will ever give birth to a dove. Major wars in the region over the past 40 years, actually 3 major wars, enormously benefited the regime in Iran. The 1991 First Persian Gulf War, the 2001 war in Afghanistan, and of course the 2003 invasion of Iraq benefited the regime to a point where even the regime's officials said publicly that the United States neutralized 3 of our main enemies on the ground: Iraq, Taliban, and the main Iranian opposition, the Mujahideen Khalq. Reaping the windfalls of these 3 conflicts, the mullahs have been wreaking havoc in the region, as Ms. Samsami mentioned. And when we look at a snapshot of the past 40 years, we see the following. During President Reagan's administration, the effort was to trade arms with the mullahs in exchange for the American hostages who were being held in Lebanon by Tehran proxies. At the same time, at the behest of Tehran, the State Department attempted to marginalize the MEK in the United States. After Khomeini's death and during George Herbert Walker Bush's administration, the policy was a very inconsistent one. During those years, if you remember, the myth of moderation began to infect policy inside the Beltway, and Rafsanjani was dubbed as a pragmatist with whom the West could engage. Then we go to the Clinton administration. Mohammad Khatami, a regime stalwart, was crowned with the title of being a moderate. Europe started speaking about constructive dialogue with the regime and provided the mullahs with tremendous economic concessions and benefits. The greatest overture, of course, was the designation of the MEK as a terrorist group at the behest of Tehran. The Iranian officials publicly, the American officials, the State Department officials publicly acknowledged that the designation of the MEK had been a goodwill gesture to the newly elected president, Mohammad Khatami. Obviously, the designation had no legal justification because, as you know, and this is now history, America's second highest court compelled the Secretary of State to delist the MEK, and of course that was done about 7 years ago. When President George W. Bush came into office, we all know what happened. The invasion of Iraq, and of course that led to the ascension of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad into the presidency and enabled the regime to advance its long-held dream of occupying Iraq, and of course, as they said, liberating Jerusalem via Karbala, something that the 8-year war with Iraq did not achieve for the regime. The US invasion did, and of course everybody knows now that Iraq is basically the backyard of the Iranian regime with hundreds of militia groups that are funded and trained by Tehran. In fact, as part of that policy, a quid pro quo with Tehran, the United States and the UK bombed MEK camps in Ashraf, effectively neutralizing a main bulwark against the regime on the ground inside Iraq. Of course, when we get to the Obama administration, we see the continuation of the same policy. The Iran nuclear deal provided the Iranian regime with billions of dollars, which were poured into the coffers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and Khamenei and other regime leaders. And you see that Iran used that money not to improve the lives of Iranians, but to prop up Bashar al-Assad in Syria, to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, to send missiles to the Houthis in Yemen, and of course to organize and train militias inside of Iraq. In effect, this policy empowered the regime in Tehran, and of course we now know that its missile program has advanced and is a major source of concern for the international community. The US, of course, also violated its commitment to the MEK, who were in Ashraf and protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and we all know that the Iraqi government, the puppet government of Nouri al-Maliki, the Iranian regime and its proxies launched 7 attacks against the MEK in Iraq, resulting in the death of 150 members and the wounding of 1,300 more. Obviously, the proponents of appeasement warned that if their brand of diplomacy and continued dialogue with Tehran rulers fails, this will lead to war. Opponents of appeasement are regularly dismissed as warmongers, whereas the regime is branded as an evolving moderate system that holds election and faces no serious existential threat from the people or from the legitimate opposition. At every turn, the West has replied the West has replied to Tehran's terrorism and hostage-taking by appeasement. Churchill once famously said that an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last. Simply put, in the strategic face-off between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime, Western countries have by and large, and until recently, have been on the wrong side of history and provided a lifeline to the mullahs. From our perspective, the right policy is to recognize the rights of the Iranian people and the organized opposition to bring down this regime. Unlike Syria and other countries suffering from dictatorships, Iran has a historic, real, and viable alternative. And I think while the United States' departure from its past policies, whose first victims were the Iranian people and the resistance, is a welcome development, from our point of view, the ultimate solution for addressing the crisis in the region is to discard the mullahs regime and bring down this illegitimate regime at the hands of the Iranian people and resistance. As Ms. Samsami said, the recognition of the National Council of Resistance as the sole democratic alternative is imperative to rectifying and ending the disastrous policy of appeasement over the past 4 decades. And we think this is what is needed to reverse the tragic course of events over the past 40 years and support a firm and realistic approach that leads to the Washington's stated policy objectives of freedom and democracy, as well as peace and security in that part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali.